The white feather. The MAS-36 rifle lay propped against the wooden crate in the abandoned farmhouse outside Carentan, its metal surfaces dulled by weeks of Norman rain. Staff Sergeant James Whitefeather Morrison traced his finger along the bolt action, feeling the unfamiliar mechanism. 2 weeks earlier, his Springfield had taken shrapnel during the push inland from Omaha Beach. Now he carried this French rifle, salvaged from a dead resistance fighter, while his squad mates quietly questioned whether their sniper could still protect them with foreign equipment. The small white feather tucked behind his helmet band caught droplets of moisture from the low-hanging clouds that had blanketed the Normandy countryside since dawn. Morrison adjusted it carefully, remembering the mockery it had earned him during training at Camp Pendleton. Instructors had called it Indian nonsense, insisting that snipers needed modern optics and American steel, not superstitions and obsolete French rifles. "Maybe you should stick to the M1 like the rest of us," Hayes had suggested the previous day, not unkindly after watching Morrison miss 3 shots while zeroing the unfamiliar weapon. Corporal Danny Hayes, the unit medic, carried his own doubts about Morrison's effectiveness with foreign equipment, though he never voiced them harshly. But Morrison understood something his critics missed. The MAS-36's straight pull bolt operated with mechanical silence that the Springfield could never match. Its shorter barrel made it ideal for the hedgerow fighting that defined their advance through occupied France. Most importantly, the rifle's iron sights, though primitive by American standards, offered a clarity that German snipers hadn't learned to expect from Allied positions. The radio crackled to life at 0347 hours, July 18, 1944. Morrison's squad received orders to establish an aid station in the recently captured village of Saint-Vith, still within range of German counterattacks. Intelligence reported Wehrmacht snipers operating from the surrounding countryside, specifically targeting American medics in violation of Geneva Convention protocols. 3 medics had been killed in the previous 48 hours while treating wounded soldiers in supposedly secure areas. Hayes gathered his medical supplies with practiced efficiency, checking morphine supplies and bandages twice before shouldering his pack. Morrison watched the medic's methodical preparation, noting how Hayes's hands never quite stopped moving, betraying an anxiety that his calm expression concealed. "You think this French rifle will actually protect me out there?" Hayes asked, attempting humor that didn't quite mask his concern. Morrison lifted the MAS-36, feeling its balanced weight. Through the farmhouse window, he could see the stone church spire of Saint-Vith rising above the wheat fields that stretched toward German-held territory. Soon he would position himself in that bell tower, 60 feet above the village square, with clear sightlines across terrain where enemy infiltrators had been reported. The white feather fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, filtering through the broken farmhouse window. Morrison's grandfather had taught him that patience was a hunter's greatest weapon, that understanding your tools mattered more than their reputation. Traditional American sniper doctrine emphasized superior equipment and overwhelming firepower. But the Lakota had taught different lessons about stillness, observation, and the kind of focus that made time slow and peripheral awareness expand. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp, and stay with us for the next chapters. What happens when everything you've been taught about warfare meets the reality of foreign soil and borrowed weapons? Hayes established his aid station in the village church, its stone walls offering protection, while tall windows provided natural light for treating casualties. The medieval architecture felt alien to both Americans, accustomed to the wooden churches and modern medical facilities of home. Carved saints gazed down from niches as Hayes arranged his supplies on makeshift tables constructed from pews and boards. Morrison climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the bell tower, the MAS-36 slung across his shoulder. Each step echoed hollowly in the confined space, and he found himself moving more quietly than necessary, as if the ancient stones demanded reverence. From the tower's height, he could survey the entire village square and the wheat fields beyond, where morning mist still clung to the hedgerows. Through the rifle's iron sights, he began his patient watch, employing what he privately called cold focus, the meditative state his Lakota grandfather had taught him during childhood hunting trips in South Dakota. Time seemed to slow as his breathing deepened, and peripheral awareness expanded to encompass every movement across the landscape. The village below showed signs of recent combat. Broken roof tiles littered cobblestone streets, and several buildings bore the pockmarks of small arms fire. French civilians moved cautiously through the morning routines, their faces carrying the wariness of people who had learned to expect sudden violence. An elderly woman swept debris from her doorstep with methodical determination, pausing occasionally to glance toward the wheat fields where danger might emerge. At 06:20 hours, Morrison spotted movement in a tree line 800 meters northeast of the village. Through careful observation, he identified a German sniper team establishing position behind a fallen oak tree. The enemy marksman carried a carabiner 98K with telescopic sight, clearly superior equipment by conventional standards. Morrison's squad mates would have expected him to call for artillery support or request backup from other snipers equipped with scoped rifles. Instead, Morrison drew upon the unorthodox technique he had developed through weeks of working with the MAS-36. Rather than attempting to eliminate the German sniper directly, he would create psychological pressure through precision intimidation. The French rifle's characteristics, dismissed as primitive by American doctrine, actually offered advantages that superior optics couldn't match. Below in the church courtyard, Hayes prepared to receive the first casualties from overnight skirmishes. Morrison watched the medic arrange his instruments with professional calm, knowing that Hayes would present an obvious target to any enemy marksman. Traditional sniper doctrine called for killing enemy marksmen through superior marksmanship, but Morrison had learned to think beyond conventional wisdom. The white feather behind his helmet band caught the morning light as he settled into position. His grandfather's voice echoed across the decades. The hunter who understands his quarry survives. The hunter who underestimates lives longest. In the context of modern warfare, this meant recognizing that psychological warfare could prove as effective as physical elimination. Morrison chambered around and began tracking the German position through his iron sights. 800 meters presented a challenging shot, even with superior equipment, but the MAS-36's clarity offered opportunities that German snipers wouldn't anticipate. They had learned to expect American forces to rely on overwhelming firepower and advanced technology, not the patient precision of traditional marksmanship. The village church bell remained silent, but Morrison felt time marking itself in heartbeats and controlled breaths. Morrison's first shot splintered bark 18 inches above the German sniper's head, the precise placement designed to announce his presence without revealing his exact position. The MAS-36's report echoed across the wheat fields, and Morrison immediately shifted his aim to a second carefully calculated target. The second round struck a rock formation to the left of the enemy position, sending stone fragments across the German sniper's concealment. Morrison heard distant shouting through the morning air, voices carrying alarm and confusion. The third shot penetrated the fallen log itself, passing close enough to the hidden enemy that the psychological impact proved devastating. From his bell tower vantage point, Morrison observed the German sniper team's response with satisfaction. The enemy marksman, accustomed to engaging targets at extreme range with superior telescopic equipment, found himself under attack from an invisible adversary using iron sights with impossible accuracy. Rather than returning fire and revealing their position, the entire German team withdrew from their carefully prepared position. The psychological effect exceeded Morrison's expectations. German snipers operated under tactical doctrines that emphasized technological superiority and methodical engagement. When confronted by precision that seemed to exceed their equipment's capabilities, their training provided no adequate response. They faced an enemy who appeared to violate the fundamental assumptions of modern warfare. At 08:30 hours, Hayes began treating casualties from a skirmish near the village outskirts. Working in the church courtyard, the medic presented an obvious target to any enemy marksman, his Red Cross armbands clearly visible against the stone walls. Morrison maintained overwatch, tracking movement across multiple potential shooting positions, while Hayes administered morphine and applied field dressings to wounded soldiers. A second German sniper team appeared in a different location, establishing position in a barn loft, approximately 700 meters southeast of the village. Morrison repeated his intimidation technique, placing shots with mathematical precision around their position until they too withdrew, rather than risk engagement with an opponent whose capabilities they couldn't assess. Throughout the morning, Morrison's unconventional tactics protected not just Hayes, but a continuous stream of wounded soldiers requiring medical attention. Traditional sniper doctrine would have called for killing enemy marksmen through superior marksmanship, but Morrison had discovered something more effective, using the MAS-36's unique characteristics to create psychological pressure that convinced German snipers the village remained too dangerous for sustained operations. Letters from home had arrived 3 days earlier, carrying news that made Morrison question everything he thought he understood about the war. His sister wrote about rationing and victory gardens, painting a picture of American abundance carefully managed, rather than genuine scarcity. Meanwhile, the French civilians of Saint-Vith moved through their daily routines with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to survive under genuine deprivation. The contrast troubled Morrison more than enemy fire. American propaganda had painted the French as either grateful allies or resentful neutrals, but the reality proved more complex. These people had endured 4 years of occupation, developing survival strategies that American training had never addressed. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. Could a man serve his country while questioning everything he'd been told about the enemy? By midday, Hayes had treated 7 wounded soldiers without interference from enemy fire, his medical station operating under Morrison's protective overwatch with an efficiency that drew attention from other units. Word spread through the regiment that the church in Saint-Vith had become a safe haven for wounded men, protected by what rumors described as supernatural marksmanship. Morrison observed the German sniper team's frustration through his iron sights as they attempted to establish new positions only to withdraw when his precisely placed shots demonstrated his awareness of their locations. None of the enemy marksmen had been killed, but their operational effectiveness had been eliminated through psychological pressure rather than physical elimination. The white feather behind Morrison's helmet band had begun to take on new meaning within his unit. The snipers visited the bell tower to study his techniques, watching how he operated the French rifle with meditative calm that seemed to slow time itself. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from 2nd Platoon spent an hour observing Morrison's cold focus technique, taking notes on breathing patterns and sight alignment methods that differed significantly from standard American doctrine. "How are you making those shots with iron sights?" Rodriguez asked, examining the MAS-36 with professional interest. "The rifle tells you what it can do," Morrison replied, checking his ammunition supply. "You just have to listen." French civilians began bringing small offerings to Hayes's medical station. Bread still warm from ovens, weak coffee made from chicory, vegetables from hidden gardens. An elderly woman named Madame Dubois approached Hayes during the afternoon lull, carrying a wooden bowl of thin soup that smelled of herbs and careful rationing. "For the soldiers," she said in heavily accented English, gesturing toward the wounded men resting in the church courtyard. Hayes accepted the soup with gratitude that seemed to surprise the French woman. Her weathered hands reminded Morrison of his grandmother's, marked by decades of work and worry. She spoke briefly with Hayes in broken English about her son, captured during the 1940 campaign and never heard from again. Morrison watched this exchange from the bell tower, noting how Hayes's expression softened as he listened to Madame Dubois' story. The medic had been trained to treat all patients equally regardless of nationality, but actual interaction with French civilians revealed complexities that medical training had never addressed. These people had suffered under German occupation, but they had also learned to survive through cooperation with various factions, including Americans who might judge their choices harshly. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the wheat fields, Morrison spotted movement that suggested German forces were repositioning for a different approach to the village. 3 separate sniper teams had withdrawn after encountering his intimidation tactics, but enemy commanders would eventually develop countermeasures for his unconventional methods. The MAS-36 had performed beyond Morrison's most optimistic expectations, its iron sights providing clarity that telescopic equipment couldn't match under certain conditions. But more importantly, the French rifle had forced him to develop techniques that emphasized patience and precision over raw firepower, methods that proved more effective than American doctrine had anticipated. Evening approached with no direct engagement between Morrison and German snipers, yet his protective mission had succeeded completely. Hayes continued treating wounded soldiers under conditions of safety that conventional sniper tactics might not have provided. The white feather caught the last rays of sunlight, filtering through the bell tower's ancient windows. At 1800 hours, Morrison discovered something that would quietly change how he understood the war itself. While repositioning his observation point within the bell tower, he found a leather journal wedged behind a loose stone in the wall. The handwriting was German, but Morrison's limited knowledge of the language allowed him to recognize it as a sniper's field notes left by a Wehrmacht marksman who had used this same position during the German retreat. The entries revealed details that contradicted everything Morrison had been taught about German tactical doctrine. The enemy sniper, identified as Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, had recorded not military observations, but deeply personal reflections on the war's human cost. Richter wrote about French civilians who had shared food with German soldiers, about American prisoners treated with unexpected kindness, about the growing doubt that consumed him as the war's reality diverged from Nazi ideology. One passage, translated with difficulty, described Richter's encounter with an American medic during a previous engagement. The German sniper had been wounded and left behind during a retreat, only to receive medical treatment from an enemy corpsman who asked no questions and showed no hatred. This experience had shattered Richter's certainty about American barbarity, leaving him torn between military duty and moral recognition of shared humanity. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he read the journal's final entries. Richter had been ordered to target medical personnel specifically, orders that violated his personal code even as they reflected official Wehrmacht policy. The German sniper's internal conflict paralleled Morrison's own growing unease with the simplistic narratives that had justified his service. The white feather behind Morrison's helmet band seemed to carry new weight as he contemplated Richter's words. Morrison's Lakota grandfather had taught him that true warriors protected life rather than simply taking it, a lesson that felt increasingly relevant as he read about a German soldier wrestling with identical moral questions. Below in the church courtyard, Hayes continued his medical work with methodical compassion that made no distinction between American and German wounded. Earlier that day, Hayes had treated a young Wehrmacht soldier found unconscious near the village outskirts, providing the same professional care he gave American casualties. Morrison had observed this treatment through his rifle scope, noting how Hayes's medical ethics transcended national boundaries. The journal's most disturbing revelation concerned the systematic targeting of medical personnel. Richter had been explicitly ordered to kill enemy medics and corpsmen, orders that violated Geneva Convention protocols that both sides supposedly respected. The German sniper's reluctance to follow these orders had led to his eventual desertion from his unit, a choice that almost certainly meant execution if he were recaptured. Morrison realized that his own unconventional tactics had been protecting Hayes from a threat more deliberate and widespread than intelligence reports had indicated. German snipers weren't simply targeting medical personnel opportunistically. They had received specific orders to eliminate American medics as a matter of policy. This knowledge transformed Morrison's understanding of his protective mission. He was not simply defending a medical station, he was preserving a beacon of humanitarian principle in a war that increasingly demanded the abandonment of such values. Hayes represented something that transcended national loyalty, the commitment to healing rather than harming, regardless of political boundaries. The journal ended abruptly, with no indication of Richter's fate after his decision to abandon his sniper position. Morrison carefully returned the leather volume to its hiding place, knowing that its contents would haunt him long after the war ended. By evening, Hayes had treated 37 wounded soldiers without interference from enemy fire, his medical station functioning as an island of mercy in the midst of ongoing combat. Morrison's protective overwatch had created conditions that allowed Hayes to work with unprecedented safety. But the cost of this success remained hidden from everyone except Morrison himself. German snipers, frustrated by their inability to locate or engage Morrison effectively, had reported the village as heavily defended by multiple sniper teams. Wehrmacht tactical reports from that sector, captured weeks later, would describe encountering American marksmen with supernatural accuracy using unknown equipment. The psychological impact of Morrison's intimidation tactics had created an illusion of overwhelming force that protected the medical station more effectively than actual firepower might have achieved. The incident at St. Vith quietly changed how Morrison's unit approached sniper operations. Rather than seeking the highest-powered rifles with the best optics, they began appreciating how unconventional equipment, properly employed, could create tactical advantages that standard doctrine overlooked. Morrison's success with the French rifle demonstrated that intimate knowledge of a weapon's characteristics mattered more than its theoretical specifications. As darkness fell over the Norman countryside, Morrison reflected on the day's revelations. Richter's journal had shown him that enemy soldiers faced the same moral conflicts that troubled American servicemen, that the boundary between friend and enemy was more permeable than military training acknowledged. The German snipers' struggle with orders to target medics revealed a shared ethical framework that transcended national boundaries. Hayes approached the bell tower as Morrison prepared to maintain night watch. The medic carried a cup of coffee made from supplies provided by French civilians, a gesture of gratitude that connected American soldiers to the people they were fighting to liberate. "I've been thinking about what you did today," Hayes said, settling beside Morrison in the ancient stone tower. "Those German snipers never fired a shot, but you protected everyone down there." Morrison adjusted the white feather behind his helmet band, feeling its symbolic weight after reading Richter's personal struggle with military orders that violated basic human decency. "Sometimes the best way to win is to make the other side question whether they want to fight," Morrison replied, thinking of the psychological pressure that had driven away multiple enemy sniper teams. The MAS-36 lay across Morrison's lap, its metal surfaces dulled by Norman rain, but its effectiveness proven beyond any doubt. The French rifle had forced him to develop techniques that emphasized precision over power, patience over aggression, psychological warfare over physical elimination. These methods had protected 37 wounded soldiers and one dedicated medic, achieving tactical success through means that military doctrine had never formally recognized. Morrison carried the MAS-36 through the remainder of the Normandy campaign, protecting medical personnel in 17 similar actions over the following months. His unconventional success with foreign equipment became part of unit legend, demonstrating how tools dismissed as obsolete could prove decisive in skilled hands. The cold focus technique he developed would influence sniper training for years afterward, though few instructors understood its origins in traditions much older than modern warfare. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. The white feather, weathered by months of combat, remained tucked behind Morrison's helmet until war's end, a quiet reminder that effectiveness often emerged from sources military doctrine failed to recognize. Years later, when people asked Morrison about his service in France, he would think of that journal hidden in the bell tower and the German sniper who had chosen conscience over orders. Some battles, Morrison learned, were won not by killing the enemy, but by helping them remember their humanity. How do you carry the memory of mercy in a world that teaches you to hate?